All right, let's jump right in. When we talk about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, it's so easy to get completely lost in the numbers, right? The spreadsheets, the savings rates. But what if the real choice isn't about how much you save, but about how you want to design your entire life? Today, we're going to break down two very different paths to financial freedom, LeanFIRE and FatFIRE. And trust me, this is about way more than just money. It's about choosing between two fundamentally different futures. So here's our roadmap. We'll start with the basics, what the FIRE movement even is, then we'll get into the main event, comparing Lean and FatFIRE. After that, we'll look at the math that makes it all tick, talk about some of the real-world hurdles you'll face, and finally wrap it all up by talking about how you can design the freedom that's right for you. Okay, first things first, let's build our foundation. What are we actually talking about when we say FIRE? At its absolute core, FIRE is about one simple, powerful idea: decoupling your income from your time. It's a plan to build up enough assets that make money for you, things like stocks, real estate, whatever, so that you don't have to trade your hours for a paycheck anymore. That's it. That's the engine behind this whole movement. The goal is to own your time again. So how on earth do you pull this off decades before everyone else? Well, this is where it gets a little wild. We are talking about an incredibly aggressive savings rate, somewhere between 50 and 75% of your take-home pay. I mean, think about that. This is what lets people squeeze a 40-year career into just 10 or 15 years. It is a completely different way of thinking about money compared to traditional advice. And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. Because once you decide to go for financial independence, you hit a massive fork in the road. This isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. It's a whole spectrum of choices. On one side of that fork, you have LeanFIRE. This is kind of the minimalist, OG version of the movement. The entire goal here is to buy back your freedom, your time, as fast as humanly possible, even if it means living a pretty frugal life. Then, on the other side, you've got FatFIRE. This is all about getting to financial freedom without giving up a high-end lifestyle. It really boils down to this: what do you value more, time or luxury? And this is where the philosophy meets the cold, hard numbers. Look at this. If you're going the LeanFIRE route, maybe spending about 40 grand a year, you might only need about $1 million. But if you're aiming for FatFIRE, or you're spending over 150,000 a year, suddenly you're looking at a target of almost $4 million, maybe even way more. This table just perfectly shows how the lifestyle you want directly creates the number you need to hit. So how do we even get these numbers? Where do they come from? Let's pop the hood and take a look at the math that's driving this whole machine. Okay, so for decades, the absolute cornerstone of retirement planning has been the 4% rule. The idea is pretty simple. You can safely take out 4% of your nest egg in your first year of retirement and then adjust that amount for inflation each year after, and you should have a really good chance of your money lasting for 30 years. It's the classic benchmark. But, and this is a big but, there's a catch for early retirees. This right here is the million-dollar question, literally. The 4% rule was built for a standard 30-year retirement. But when you're retiring at 40, your retirement could last 50, even 60 years. That safe withdrawal rate starts to look a lot riskier. You run into something called sequence of returns risk, which is just a fancy way of saying if the market tanks right after you retire, you could be in deep trouble because you're forced to sell your investments when they're cheap just to live. And his slide just nails the impact. Let's say you need $40,000 a year to live. With the 4% rule, your magic number is $1 million. Easy. But if you drop your withdrawal rate to a safer 3% to make sure your money lasts for that super long retirement, boom, your target jumps to over $1.3 million. That's a 33% bigger pile of money you have to save. That tiny 1% change has a massive, massive impact. The formula itself is dead simple. Your portfolio goal is just your annual expenses divided by your withdrawal rate. But like we just saw, that little R, the rate, has all the power. Shifting it from 0.04 to 0.03 can literally add years to your career. That's why picking your withdrawal rate is one of the single biggest decisions you'll ever make on this journey. Okay, so you've done the math, you've got your number. The hard part's over, right? Well, not so fast. Saving the money is honestly only half the battle. Now we've got to talk about the real world and all the curveballs it can throw at you that don't show up on a spreadsheet. And I'm not talking about some abstract risk. There is a very real, very specific regulatory change coming down the pipeline that could absolutely wreck a lot of early retirement plans. Let's talk about 2026. 2 words: healthcare costs. In 2026, the special subsidies for the Affordable Care Act are scheduled to end. This brings back something called the subsidy cliff. And look at these numbers. A LeanFIRE couple with a low income might pay just $84 a year for health insurance. But if their income goes just $1 over the limit, their premium could explode to almost $27,000. It's insane. This makes managing your income in retirement absolutely critical. But beyond the numbers, there's a huge psychological trap that a lot of early retirees fall into, and it's called the arrival fallacy. It's that feeling when you spend years, maybe a decade, laser focused on one single goal. You finally get there, you cross the finish line, and then you just feel empty. The permanent happiness you thought you'd find just isn't there. Yeah, retiring early can really mess with your head. If you were a high achiever, you can have a full-blown identity crisis when you're no longer the manager or the engineer. All your friends are still working, so you can feel totally isolated. And this can look different for different people. A FatFIRE retiree might feel the loss of status more, while a LeanFIRE person might feel out of sync with their friends' lifestyles. The real work actually starts after you quit a job, figuring out who you are now and what gets you out of bed in the morning. Which brings us to our final and maybe the most important question of all. Once you have the money, once you've bought back your time, what is it all for? What's the point? This is where you stop being an accountant and start being an architect of your own life. And here we are back at another big choice. On one hand, there's the die with zero philosophy. The idea here is to maximize your life experiences, to create memories, not to have the biggest bank account when you die. On the other hand, you have traditional legacy planning, which is all about preserving that wealth for your kids, grandkids, or for charity. You can see how this mirrors the lean versus fat debate, right? It's about optimizing for lifestyle versus building a lasting financial legacy. So how do you actually practice die with zero? Well, it comes down to a few key ideas. First, you plan your big adventures like hiking Machu Picchu for when you're young and healthy enough to do them. Second, you give money to your kids or to causes you care about when they can actually use it, not when you're 90. And finally, you remember the goal isn't to win the game by dying with the most money, but to win by having lived the richest life. So as we've seen, this whole thing, LeanFIRE versus FatFIRE, it's about so much more than a number in a bank account. It shapes the math you use, the risks you have to plan for, even the psychological challenges you'll face. At the end of the day, the FIRE movement is just a powerful toolkit for designing a life. It forces you to figure out your own personal balance between freedom, security, purpose, and risk. And that's really the thought I want to leave you with. The most important question isn't how much do I need to retire? The real question is, what am I retiring to? What does your version of a rich life, a life full of meaning and joy, actually look like? That's the real project.